For as long as video games have been around, there has always been certain types of games. Certain genres something can fall into, like racing, platforming, horror. But I'm not talking about those games, I'm talking about certain specific types of games that aren't technically genres. Those, of course, are advertisement games, or for short, adver games. Now, games with advertisements and brands in them are nothing new and still happen a ton today. That Indiana Jones game that came out last year, the endless amount of Marvel games, Star Wars games, this concept is nothing new. But what I mean when I say adver games are video games that only exist in order to sell a product of some kind. You see, games with brands in them aren't inherently trying to sell you on something. More so, they are games set inside a specific universe. These are great because you already know what things are. They don't have to establish anything from the ground up. In Battlefront 2, they don't need to explain who Darth Vader is. Or Marvel Rivals doesn't need a 5-minute intro cutscene introducing Iron Man. These games are great because they work off of known characters and can mess around with them in their own ways. Adver games purely exist to sell you a product. These games wouldn't exist unless some whack corporation thought it was a good idea to make a video game shilling their slop. We wouldn't have gotten Pepsi Man unless Pepsi wanted to sell us Pepsi. When you buy a video game with a brand in it, you're already being sold on the brand. The thing you have bought pretty much is the product they're trying to sell you. And if they're lucky, they can squeeze a few more series purchases out of you. Case in point, I've kind of gotten interested in Moon Knight through Marvel Rivals. When you buy an advertisement video game, its only mission statement is to sell other products. Now, sometimes things like this can be cool. Think Chex Quest, McDonald's Treasureland, Taco Bell Tasty Temples Challenge, yes, that's a real game. But the cool ones are few and far between. Most of the time, it's stuff like Yo Noid, Pepsi Man, Chester Cheetah Too Cool to Fool. A vast majority of these old adver games are simply not worth your time. They're mostly just some garbo you can give to kids because they like whatever it's representing. And because of that, these games are pretty much a way of the past. Any kid nowadays would rather play like Roblox or Fortnite or anything that's popular online that's free. So the only times we get games like this nowadays is when KFC feels like shitposting and making a dating sim. Most of the time when a brand feels like jumping in on the video game space, it's typically through a video game that already has creation tools inside of it, like Walmart and Crocs on Roblox. Adver games are pretty much dead. That doesn't mean we still don't get brand advertising shoved in our face, like NBA 2K21 straight up having commercials play inside of it. Companies will stop at nothing in order to squeeze dollars out of us. In a way, almost making me miss the classic days of licensed games. Not all of them were great, but some drove to be something more than just a petty cash grab. Some developers worked with what they were given and strove to make something actually fun. An actual game may have you, something that is above trying to sell you on a different product and can stand on its own 2 feet as its own video game, completely detached from the source material. And one of those games would be none other than Spot. Not that one. So going into this, I had initially thought that Cool Spot was the only one. Little did I know! So, to most of you, the normal ones, there is only one Cool Spot game. Now, hold on. Stop the presses. Wait a minute. Back up a second. Cool Spot? Huh? Most of these advert games are pretty on the nose with what they're trying to advertise, but this one just kind of isn't. For you see, Spot was the franchise commissioned and birthed from the loins of none other than 7-Up. Statistically, nobody's favorite soda drink. Despite what you may be thinking, people actually had to make this video game, and just who were these people? That would be none other than the famous Virgin Games. They have made such classics as Doriath, The Biz, Silkworm, Archer McLean's Pool, and Conflict Middle East Political Simulator. That would be none other than the Virgin Games. Okay, yeah, so these guys are kind of unheard of, but they do have their names attached to some pretty cool stuff, such as the Genesis version of Aladdin. Yeah, most of these games kind of stink. It's not to say they haven't made some cool stuff, but most of this is either unheard of or is rancid. What they are best known for is creating European and other regional variants of different games. The European versions of Earthworm Jim, Doom 2, Super Bomberman 2, Mega Man X3, Street Fighter 3, Guilty Gear X, Dino Crisis, Marvel vs. Capcom, a bunch of Resident Evils. They've had their hand in quite a few pies. But who exactly owned these hands? They had quite an impressive lineup of developers working here, actually. David Perry and Doug TenNapel, who had created Earthworm Jim, and they also hired an up-and-coming video game composer who would help them work on some of their earliest titles, like the Prince of Persia games. Tommy Tallarico. Thanks Virgin Games, you birthed the menace. They primarily made dog shit in their earlier years until being purchased by Blockbuster, owned by Viacom. They purchased this new kid on the block because they wanted to crack into the video game market. That's how we got a lot of their older games that were focused around movies and stuff. Alien 3 for the Amiga, Terminator for the Genesis, and even Doom games for the MS-DOS Amiga and Sega CD. And you can probably see where this is going from here. 7-Up noticed that companies such as Cheetos and Domino's are putting their mascots into video games and decided they needed to do the exact same thing in order to appeal to the youth. And through all of this, we would get Spot the video game. What the f***? This Spot isn't cool at all! Spot wasn't quite ready to become cool yet. He had to have his beginnings with Spot the video game for the NES, Game Boy, Atari ST, Amiga, Commodore 64, and MS-DOS. And I have to say, this is quite a rough start considering this was almost not even a Spot game. Or at least it didn't start that way. Wise Owl Studio made this game called Infection, which is straight up just Othello, which then sold their game to Virgin, which renamed it to Attacks, and released what is literally just Othello into arcades. But this is at the same time that 7-Up wanted a branded video game made for them. So they changed Attacks, previously known as Infection, to Spot the video game, which is literally just Othello. Confused? Confused. This game was rebranded 3 times. Let's start with the NES version since it'll be the easiest to explain everything with this one. If you've played Othello, you'll get the gist of it, but it's kind of deep. In single player, you and one computer will start on opposing diagonals of the board. You in the top left and bottom right, and top right and bottom left for the computer. You can move checkers 1 space away in any direction, which will duplicate onto that space, or alternatively move it 2 spaces away. The downside of that though is it makes the checker move with it instead of cloning itself. The only reason you'll ever want to do this is if you move a checker within 1 space of an opponent's piece, it'll convert it to your color. So if you're a pincer and are trying to salvage whatever pieces you can, jumping out of it is a pretty solid strategy. But the best thing to do is just move 1 space away because the ability to clone it. Because jumping, yes, lets you move your piece further, also leaves where you just were exposed for an opponent to duplicate their checker onto. It's a surprisingly in-depth and addictive game loop for an NES game. I really wish there was a forfeit feature though, because if you screw up early enough into a match, I feel like it should just let you give up instead of watching the whole thing play out. Like, I made this one map where I screwed around and made it completely unfair, and the computer just had to watch as I filled in the board instead of just ending the game. Regardless though, it's a pretty fun time, especially considering this was originally supposed to be a budget release. And then 7-Up got their greasy hands on it and turned it into a full price title. Yeah, I don't think it's worth all that. There is a lot you can get out of it, don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's full price worthy. Like, you can choose different pre-made maps as well as creating your own, which I could imagine would do wonders for replayability. The music is fine enough for an NES game. There's multiple computer skill levels, so you can either get curb stomped or really curb stomped. But I think my personal favorite part of the game is the style. I am not kidding you when I say this is genuinely the best animated NES game I have ever seen. There is genuinely an animation for every different way you can move a piece. Move it to the left and Spot will do a little shimmy over there. Move it downwards and he'll dive into it. Move it up and he'll fall backwards cartoonishly. Move it 1 space away and down into the left and he'll breakdance across a sizable part of the screen getting down there. I have yet to see any other NES game given this much flair and personality. Really, the only complaint I could come up with was the animation makes the game a bit slower when you're just trying to play it instead of gawk at how cool it looks. But then I realized you could turn that off in the settings, so really I don't have much. The only knock against it I have is that it's just Othello. Like, it's fun, don't get me wrong. And the production value here is really high when it did not need to be. But it's just goddamn Othello. Still though, it's a lot of fun. And if you're into weird and wacky NES games like this, then I would say check it out. But if you have epilepsy and like seeing the hot nurses, then you should check out the Game Boy version instead. So this is pretty much the same game except bogged down a lot. For starters, they have somehow made the settings menu feel clunky. Like it took a few button presses for anything to actually react. I can imagine this is what Infection was originally supposed to look like though, considering there is no Spot outside of this little funky dude off to the sides of the screen. And when you move a piece and your opponents get it converted, they spread like the flood. I guess it was probably fine enough for the time if you want to play this game on the go, but nowadays it's completely worthless. Unless you're one of those people I just discussed a second ago, because, seizure warning real quick, I'm going to dim the screen, but holy shit, look at this winning animation. I don't have epilepsy, but dear god, this hurt my eyes. The NES version is just plain better, especially if you value your health. But if you'd like to combine the barely functioning of the Game Boy version and the amazing looks of the NES one, then might I suggest Spot the video game for the MS-DOS. It's pretty spotty, predictably, but it has a lot more animations than the NES one somehow. Like every time it changes between who's playing, you'll have these 2 little spots propel themselves over. It's cute, even if it makes the game last a billion times longer than it needs to. Same goes for the Atari ST, Amiga, and Commodore 64 versions of the game. I couldn't get those working, but from the gameplay footage I found on YouTube, it seems by and large the same game as the MS-DOS version, just less functional. Overall, I would say the NES version is the best. As a standalone, Spot the video game is alright, I suppose, but as an NES game, it's great. Find me any other game on this console that looks as clean, I dare you. As a first outing for Spot, this is pretty poor. Like, genuinely, what does any of that have to do with 7-Up? Like, it's a fine enough game, but none of it wants to make me drink soda. The only thing that's 7-Up about this is Spot himself. The rest of this game is completely disconnected. It's fine as a video game, but completely nothing as an advertisement one. It wasn't even originally a Spot game to begin with. It was some shit called fucking Infection. But obviously, Spot the video game for the NES and hamper full of other consoles I'm not listing again isn't why you're here, obviously. I don't even think most people have even heard about this first game. It's fine for what it is, but this isn't Spot. Pretty much all of this video up until this point has been set up. Foreplay, if you will. This obviously isn't the Spot you want, and I know that. When you think about the character of Spot, your mind does not go to the Spot video game or those old 7-Up commercials or 2 Spots or cleaning up soda. It probably doesn't even go to 7-Up at all. When somebody brings up Spot nowadays, they are universally talking about one thing. Released 2 years after Spot the video game came Spot's first original outing. Yeah, this game wasn't a reskin of a game named after a disease this time, it's its own thing. Cool Spot released for the Genesis, and the Master System, and the Super Nintendo, and the Game Boy, and the Game Gear, and the MS-DOS, and the Amiga, and the 40th branch of the United States of America. We're like 10 minutes in and I still don't know what an Amiga is. Naturally, since Cool Spot came out for more platforms than I have arm hairs, some of these versions are nothing like the others. And because of that, I'm gonna go a bit more in depth on these different versions, unlike Spot the video game. But I'll be starting this discussion with the version most of you are probably familiar with. Cool Spot for the Super Nintendo and Cool Spot for the Sega Genesis. I played the Super Nintendo one first, so we'll dive into that one first and see how things stack up against the Genesis one later. And I must say, what an intro. This 7-Up bottle presumably polluting the ocean with Spot coming out of its logo and surfing on the damn thing. Accompanying that is a chiptune of Wipeout of all songs. You probably don't know it by name, but you certainly know by that. Nothing too interesting about this title screen except for the Genesis one looking way better. But actually starting to play the game instead of just looking at it, we're sent off to the first level, Shell Shock. The best way I can describe how Spot controls is, have you ever played Cuphead? Legitimately, all of these stages feel like running gun levels plucked directly from Cuphead. And that extends to how Spot controls. Spot plays like a truck in the best and worst ways imaginable. In a good way, because once he gets going, he's an unstoppable circle mercilessly decimating any poor creature that happens to get in his path. And in a bad way of once he gets going. It's impossible to say anything else about how he maneuvers without bringing this up first. Most video games make the player character's locomotion up to who is controlling them. This is often done by having a run button of some sort. Other games that have a higher focus on speed go for this by just having them run fast by default. In Cool Spot, Spot moves at like an inch an hour and needs to build up momentum incredibly slowly, in which blinking wrong will make him lose all of it going back to snail mode. He's really damn sluggish most of the time. The only way he's going to be able to achieve any form of speed is by walking without being interrupted for about a second or two. And when I say without being interrupted, I mean it. If you even dare turn around during this, he'll go back to his swagger-ass walk of dipshittery. I love it. You're probably expecting me to complain about this, but honestly, I love how he controls. The game is primarily focused around Spot's main attack, being the cool shot. Infinite ammo, no cooldown, go to town. And because of how the levels in this game are laid out and how it's mostly based around combat, I actually don't mind this run being all fumbly like this. Newer players will probably never have the ability to take full advantage of Spot's run because of all of the enemies, but more experienced players who know the layouts will. Because of how long his sprint takes to charge up, you'll need a solid area in order to really get going. So people who have autism like me will be able to memorize where every enemy is and be able to maneuver around them. It's honestly kind of genius, if unintentional feeling. It feels more like they just whipped up a dash and made it really garbage, but it worked beautifully accidentally. Adding on to that is how his jump works. If you're not holding an erection and jump, he'll do this little straight upwards thing while facing the camera. It's fine enough for precision platforming, but isn't great when you're trying to actually traverse these levels. But if you're holding left or right and jump, he'll do this Olympic event somersault thing, sending him flying. It goes high, sends you a decent bit, and my favorite part is that it's affected by the momentum you build. So if you get running for enough time, you can just breeze through these levels. But obviously you won't be doing that for a huge chunk of them because of how combat-centric it is. Enemies can come at you from pretty much all angles, and luckily, Cool Spot can shoot in all directions. All 8 of them. But also lock in place by holding R and looking around. This is damn near essential for most of the game. Enemies that are below you at weird angles, enemies that are above you, enemies that are in front of you but you don't want to get too close. If there was a version of this game that didn't have the lock in place feature, I'm sure it would be significantly worse than this. Everything in Cool Spot's arsenal works together with one another in order to give this game such a unique feeling to it. He builds up momentum slowly because most of the game you're going to be wanting to killing enemies, so you wouldn't want to go fast in the first place. But for those who are seasoned, getting enough space in order to plow through everything with devil-may care is insanely satisfying. It really feels like there's nothing that needs changing with him. Spot controls excellently, I love it. This genuinely might be one of my favorite platformer protagonists to control. Like, everything feels just right. No notes, it's perfect. But you might have asked yourself something by now. Why on God's green earth am I nearly 20 minutes into a video about a 7-Up mascot? What's the incentive for going fast? Well, that's because of the scoring system right at the end. Like most classic platformers, there's a score, time limit, and life tracker. And I'm not sure if you guys are going to believe me, but this might be one of the only classic platformers where I am in favor of the life system remaining how it is. To actually beat levels in Cool Spot, you'll need to get these little red tokens. Copies of his own and his brother's torsos are scattered throughout the levels and serve as the primary collectible. These and the 7-Up logo all serve to increase one thing, and that's your coolness. Charted by this little thingy at the top of the screen, your coolness directly contributes to pretty much everything. To actually beat a stage, you'll need 60 or more of these radical points. The red spots are pretty much everywhere and give you 1 point each, while the 7-Up logos are hidden a bit better and give you 7. Writing is my one talent. My favorite thing though is how all of these collectibles and the time limit both play into one another. After you beat a stage, you'll be shown this little scoring screen tallying up how much time is remaining and how much coolness you have. If you manage to get either a ton of time or a ton of coolness, you'll be given an extra life. But Cool Spot isn't just content in letting you get one or the other. It's entirely up to you which you'll want to prioritize. No matter what, in the end of every level, you need to get at least 60 coolness in order to progress. So somewhere, you'll have to go off the beaten path in order to grab some extra red spots or a 7-Up logo, but how far off that beaten path you go is entirely up to your choice. You could go for 100% coolness and spend pretty much all of your time, which would get you an extra life, or you could go for as little as possible and maximize time saved, and get an extra life. It's such a brilliant way of catering to all sorts of players. The more experienced players want to go through as fast as possible, getting as little as possible, and the more methodical players who want to try to get every red spot they can. Also, just so everybody's keeping track, this is an advert game commissioned by 7-Up. The genius of this game seriously cannot be understated. I'm serious. We are looking at the same thing right now, and I am saying this about a game called Cool Spot! Both going as fast as possible and collecting the red spots are completely valid strategies and are equal in the game's eyes, and I love that. One of the ways it caters to both the let's just get this over with and the I actually want to play the game crowds is one of the collectibles I haven't mentioned as of yet. You can find little stopwatches that will give you bonus time, but unlike all of the other collectibles, these are usually along the most straightforward path. Let's look at the first level for a minute. I'm going to go more into depth about the level design later, but I'm just going to cut ahead real quick. There's a top half and bottom half. The top half has more precarious platforming and features spot jumping from bubbles and balloons, while the bottom half has way more enemies but pretty much no platforming. The top half is positively littered with red spots to grab, while the bottom doesn't get nearly as many, but does get 2 separate stopwatches. The top half is more oriented for players who want to collect as much as possible, while the bottom is more intended for people who want to blaze through. So corresponding with your choice, either more time or more coolness. It's an insane amount of thought drained into a platformer from this generation. It's such a genius way of catering to both playstyles while not favoring one too much over the other. Hard emphasis on too much. The red spots serve a greater purpose than just getting you an extra life. If you get 85% coolness, at the end of the level, you'll be rewarded with a bonus stage. In these levels, instead of your typical horizontal layout for most platformers, you'll be moving vertically up the 7-Up bottle trying to get as many red spots and 7-Up logos as possible, while platforming up disappearing bubbles. But that's not the main attraction. What you're here for are the letters. levels. Every bonus stage at the very top of it has one part of the word uncola in it. 7-Up's whole gimmick at the time was that they were a caffeine-free, healthier soda, calling themselves the Uncola. What they serve to do outside of making me thirsty for a drink I don't even like is functioning as basically another set of lives. When you run out of lives, you're pretty much SOL unless you have one of these. When you die on your last life, one of these will be consumed in exchange for extra lives. Yes, this game's continue system is based off of performing well in bonus stages. I love it. It actually makes me want to try and do well in these levels, getting as much coolness as possible, because your reward is basically a safety net for the later, trickier levels. It's insane how everything here works in tandem with one another. You can either prioritize special stages and getting continues with the red spots, or never need continues in the first place by maximizing extra lives by going for the time bonus. It's just a very free-feeling game. A lot of platformers, especially around the time, were very fixed with how you could play them. It's usually their way or the highway, but in Cool Spot, it conforms to how you want to play, and I love that. The amount of thought that went into everything with this game just baffles me. It truly feels like no matter who you are or how you want to play can speak to you in some way. The thought put into every little nook and cranny of Cool Spot is immense, and I feel this is no better orchestrated than inside the levels. Let's go through all 11 of them, and I'll try to prove to you how cool this spot is. But before we do that, why are we going through these levels? A question you have definitely asked by now is, what is the plot of Cool Spot? It's said nowhere in the game itself, but we can take a look at the manual to get informed about what's going on. Spot and his friends, Spot, and Spot are in trouble and they need help. Fast! Okay, real talk, I love the Game Gear version of this manual because of just how horribly grammatically incorrect it is. 4 yours instead of 4 years, like the second sentence is pathetic. Why did nobody proofread this? Wild Wicked Willy Will has been trying to prove the existence of Spot for years, and has put Spot trap cages all over the place in order to ensnare them. That son of a bitch! And the only Spot to not be captured was our very own Cool Spot. And Wicked Willy Will's coming to collect them eventually. I guess that's the explanation for there being a time limit, if that even needed an in-universe explanation. We also never see this Wild Wicked Willy Will anywhere actually in-game. Also, this is just f***ing nonsense, and I kind of love that, which gives us our objective of freeing the other Spots from their cages. I don't know why they refuse to leave their cells unless you're cool enough, but I kind of respect it. Okay, I'll stop screwing around. Let's actually get to the first level. Starting off with the one I've partially discussed already, being Shell Shock. Most levels in Cool Spot are like big sprawling labyrinths for you to explore, but isn't 2 other ones coming up kind of break that tradition by being more like Sonic? So there's 2 paths you're presented with from the start. You can either just go forward, or you can be a straight up based intellectual legend and jump off the 7-Up bottle you rode in on and go to this top path. This is a good place to introduce the platforming gimmicks. Cool Spot doesn't really have any traditional floating platforms like a regular video game from this era. Instead, it has naturally integrated platforms. Flying UFOs, bubbles, rocket ships, and blimps hanging from the ceiling. It's really damn good at making all of this platforming look natural, if we ignore the circle with hands. Kind of like Donkey Kong Country, how all of the platforms are dynamically a part of the environment. Yeah, obviously the same thing as Cool Spot. But specifically for this level, we're introduced to the bubbles and the balloons. These are those same platforms featured in the special stages. The bubbles, once you jump off of them, will pop from underneath of you and reappear after a few seconds, while the balloons are always there but have a pretty small hitbox, meaning they're kind of tricky to latch onto. The top half is entirely comprised of those 2 things, jumping from balloon to balloon to bubble. It's kind of tricky to stay up here, which is why the bottom path is as dangerous as it is. This is where pretty much all of the enemies are. Shell Shock only introduces 3 though: dragonflies, crabs, and hermit crabs. There are some dragonflies along the top path, but not nearly as many as the bottom one. Dragonflies can fly and shoot little annoying projectiles. I would complain about this, but I've already glazed this game enough. Why not keep going? I think they work contextually with the top path to try to make the player fall down to the bottom, but combining it with all of the others down in the bottom layer just kind of bugs me. Crabs usually stay in their little holes and only come out to attack Spot, just like you, and hermit crabs waddle around until you blast off their shell, in which they'll start running around frantically. All of these enemies working in conjunction with one another does a pretty good job of applying stress, honestly. I mean, you have like 8 hit points and enemies can occasionally drop a 7-Up bottle, which will give you a ton of health back, but still, getting pincered can happen a lot if you're not careful, especially if you fall from the top path down below, because 9 times out of 10 you'll be landing in the middle of like 4 enemies, so you can either take things slow go on the bottom path while killing everything, or go to the top path and blaze through while risking losing everything. It's a surprisingly good risk-reward system for the first level of this game. Really funny considering no other level will follow this structure. I'm also a big fan of the aesthetics of this one. I like this part at the beginning that made me realize, oh yeah, Cool Spot is small, isn't he? Like this big ass chair or pair of headphones. Great time to bring up the mechanic that this chair introduces. If you land on a platform that's at a 45-degree angle, you'll start tumbling down it somewhat uncontrollably. I say somewhat because you can chain little jumps up these slopes in order to climb them, and you can always just jump out of it, so it's really not that bad. They're usually just placed in later levels as trickier, more reaction-based segments of platforming. Nothing I'm willing to waste a minute of discussion on. But that's pretty much the first level of Cool Spot though, and as an advert game, it is not a bad first level. Like, it teaches you pretty much everything you're going to see coming forward. The bubble platforms, which will become prevalent, the somewhat more niche balloon ones, slopes, flying, stationary, and moving enemies, and that if you want to maximize coolness, you're going to have to explore a bit. It isn't anywhere close to some of the better tutorials out there like Mega Man X or something like that, but it's still pretty solid at teaching you everything you'll need to know for your Cool Spot journey. But it doesn't teach you exactly everything. For that, we'll have to move to the second level of the game, Peer Pressure. This one takes place on a boat dock and more closely mirrors how all of the other levels will be playing out. Large pseudo-maze layouts prioritizing exploration and combat. As I was getting at earlier, if you're experienced, you can still definitely speed through them. It just comes alongside memorizing the layout of everything. Regardless though, this level introduces another primary mechanic of the game. Ropes! You can pretty much do anything you would regularly do on these things except up and down. Shoot, jump off of them, lock in place and shoot around freely. I'm specifically bringing up that point for something really funny later. This level also introduces two things that will become particularly prevalent as we go forward. Spikes on the ground that can hurt you, and fake walls. They're pretty obvious in this level because they come in the form of support beams that have partially been hollowed out, but they are a lot more noteworthy going forward, trust me. For now though, they only serve as ways for the game to connect one part of the level to another. And the spikes. These come in many forms, all adapting to the aesthetics of the stage they're in. Urchins, fish hooks, barbed wire, nails sticking upwards, tacks, all completely based off the level you're in. If there were just regular video gamey spikes everywhere, I probably just wouldn't pay any mind to them, but I love how they're all naturally integrated into the environments through the level theming. It just goes back to what I was saying with all these environments feeling like a real location you're going through. There's never any floating platforms that are just there inconspicuously. Everything in this world feels alive minus the red circle with legs. All of this feels like it could be a real place. Like there are these platforms later into the level that are suspended up by these ropes being held on by hooks, and it just looks great. Nothing here ever feels like it's a video game environment. It just feels like a environment. Or an environment, technically. Screw you, completionists, for giving this game a donate rating. How about you donate something, Gerard? I don't entirely blame him for that, though, honestly. The rating, not the charity fraud. This level pioneers one of the biggest problems I have. Yes, despite the amount of cool spot sucking off I'm doing, it actually does have some little things in it that stop me from 100% enjoying it. I would say the screen size is one of those. When you're climbing down ropes or falling down to lower areas, which will happen, trust me, it kind of feels hard to see what's below you. And the developers knew this and told you to go f*** yourself about it. So there will sometimes be these strings of red spots going down in an arc you can easily maneuver into by jumping off a ladder. The problem is the majority of the time there's spikes right below these. And by the time you're fully committed to your jump of grabbing red spots, there's no way you can avoid these. I don't think I can defend this honestly. The developers were just dicks. Unfortunately, I've played this game enough times to genuinely consider getting a cool spot tattoo, so I can typically remember where the hazards are in this level. But this is still completely unfair to new players. There's no getting around this complaint. This is just genuinely stupid. The enemies in this level also kind of capitalize off your limited knowledge of what's going on around you. And all of them kind of fill similar roles to the enemies of Shell Shock. Like, I've been using the manual to get the names of the different enemies, and the crabs between Shell Shock and Peer Pressure share the exact same name. Genuinely, these are the most uncreative names I've seen in a platformer. Regardless though, they all kind of fill the same role, just skewed slightly to better fit the change in level layout. Crabs don't stay in one position now, they just kind of haphazardly roam around. Bees are just mosquitoes, but instead of shooting projectiles, they dive right at the player. Oysters are just projectile shooting versions of the hermit crabs. You get the gist. But there are two solely unique ones here. Worms will climb up and down on ladders, and fish will shoot from lower sections of the pier. Both designed around f***ing you over on the ropes when you can't see shit. All of the enemies in this level are just fine, honestly. I like everything else about it, though. It's just really pretty in my opinion, but I think I should save our discussion about the visuals for our next level. Level 3, Off the Wall. Keeping in theming of Spot being really small, this level takes place inside of an attic. I'm pretty sure. I'm 50-50 on this being an attic or basement. Playing in with the spikes, all of the ropes change per level as well. In some later levels, they're shoelaces, and here are their wires. I just adore the presentation of Cool Spot. It gives me real Pikmin vibes with not only being small, but also how everything else in the environment feels natural. This level on the Super Nintendo version also has this pretty cool flashlight effect. The only reason I'm specifying that is because it's the only version that has it for some reason. I don't know, maybe Nintendo licensed flashlights for this one. Makes the vibes go through the roof though. It truly feels like we're rummaging around in someone's walls. Oh my god, I just connected 2 and 2 and realized this level takes place in someone's walls. I'm an idiot. Only 2 new enemies this time around. Not even checking the manual, just going to guess their names and see if I'm right later. Spiders and mice. And then my script tells me to grab the manual and check while recording. It's alright, I got it on hand. Yep, spiders will crawl along the ceiling until close enough to you, then descend downwards, while mice will consistently throw little blocks of cheese. I'm pretty whatever on the spiders, but I like the mice. They're always in really weird angles, so you'll have to maneuver yourself just right in order to hit them. This level also has an exclusive gimmick. Mouse traps serve as typical hazards, not too dissimilar to any of the other spikes we've talked about, but that's only if you jump on the trap end of it. If you instead hop on the part that snaps closed, you'll get shot up into the air. They never really do anything with this though. I honestly think it would have been really cool if there was like maybe a 1-up or something that was hidden in a higher area, only accessible by bouncing up to them. Usually they just end up sending you to a spider or something. Honestly, it feels like a huge missed opportunity, but whatever. Regardless of all of that though, this level's vibe is just right. And of course, all of that has to do with this game's presentation. Everything with Cool Spot visually has held up immaculately. Like, look at this background during Shell Shock, or the wood texture of Peer Pressure. It just looks pretty. Of course, there are plenty of Super Nintendo games that look just as good, if not better in some cases, but where I think this game has held up the best is the animation. Just like Spot the video game, Cool Spot has tremendous animation. From his little stupid strut when he's walking, to his somersaulting, to his stationary jumps, it all looks great. This game's style is rad as hell. Cool Spot snapping and cleaning his glasses and his idol, his health bar just being his face progressively peeling off the UI, his death animation where his shades go flying off his face, his handstand and flipping around thing when he's going down a slope, him destroying a clock with a giant mallet if you run out of time. All of it feels so charming. It feels like I'm watching like a Looney Tunes cartoon or something. It's trying so damn hard to appeal to the youth that I just can't help but love it. It's so over the top that it loops back around to being cool again. If any of you are familiar with the animation of Earthworm Jim, you can definitely tell the people who made that worked on this. It's so expressive and Looney Tuny. I love it. There are definitely games in this era that have a similar level of animation and visual quality. Yoshi's Island, Donkey Kong Country, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Mega Man X, Street Fighter. But you see, the thing is, all of those are from huge studios. Nintendo, Sega, Capcom. This is from a small development team commissioned by a soda drink company. They're not just punching above their weight, they're punching in a completely different sport. Everything here just feels like they were going above and beyond to make sure it was something special. And speaking of trying to make sure something is high quality and special, you can support me in my exploits by becoming a channel member. I have a new members only video going up alongside this one where I try different 7-Up recipes from the website, and I think it's pretty cool. I'm writing this before I even have a basic outline for that concept. But enough pointless shilling in a shallow attempt to make you buy something. Let's get back to the adver game. Enough sucking his spot off though, let's move on to the next level. Level 4, Waiting Around. This introduces the concept of instant death. This level takes place inside of a kiddie pool and has some new mechanics, predictably. This water pretty much functions as a pit in any other video game. This level is also the start of one of my biggest problems of the game.
New Super Mario Bros. Wii is a tough game. Old school tough. So you better bring your butt-stomping A game, as this will test even the most seasoned platforming veterans.
So, one of the new enemies that introduces is the frog. These camp out at the bottom of the pool and shoot bubbles at you. Pretty manageable, right? Well, that's not the only thing it introduces. These are the biplanes. The stupid pissy biplanes. I've already mentioned the screen crunch is a bit of an issue, and that's no better orchestrated than with these avian assholes. They'll only spawn in at the top of the screen, and since this level has some pretty precise platforming, they only spawn in at the peak of your jump to tell you to go f yourself and spit in your mouth. You don't have time to deal with these guys either, because one of the new mechanics this level introduces is the UFO platforms. After you step on them, you'll have a second to jump off until they drop you. It's pretty cool, even though they forgot to cap the momentum when you're jumping off these things so you can go flying. And this level is is designed pretty vertically, so if you mess up a jump just right, you're going all the way back down to the bottom, or worse, outright dying. Now this game isn't that cruel though. At least not yet. Several of the jumps that make up this higher area of the level have rockets that are at a 45-degree angle, making them slide down, which is genuinely just them trying to troll the player, because usually at the end of these there's the new blobby bubbles. Instead of bouncing off these, Spot instead gets stuck inside, and flies off like a cool kite for a little while. A nice way to vary the platforming if nothing else. But these are few and far between, and really does not make up for the unavoidable gnat hovering over. When you're trying to precisely platform through the level and you have this bitchy bomber hovering overhead, it ruins everything. This level would be perfectly fine if it didn't have these joyless jets ruining my day. Outside of the abysmal airliners, this level's quite alright. I like how they get around having floating platforms by making them strung up by fishing wire. It's pretty ingenuitive. And this Toy Store aesthetic is pretty cool for how short-lived it being cool will be. This is the beginning of the actual tangible problems I have with this game. This Spot discussion so far has been pretty dang positive to say the least, but something that is completely unforgivable about this game is its absurd enemy spam in the later levels. A lot of you who are hashtag retro gamers probably know this, but during the NES and Super Nintendo era of consoles, game developers didn't really know how to, like, balance their games. A lot of the time, developers just resort to more enemies equals more hard, which is technically true, but isn't really fair. The Lion King, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, Super Contra, Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, Battletoads, Mega Man. To give them some merit, this was back when game design was still pretty new, so I can't really blame these games for their absurd difficulty at times through the means of enemy spam, but just because I can't blame them does not mean I can forgive them. And unfortunately, the same goes for the later levels of Cool Spot, the first of which being Toying Around. This level is the perfect case study for everything wrong with Cool Spot. For starters, it's the aforementioned enemy spam. It's insane here! I've been using the Game Gear version of the manual to source all of these enemies' names, which stops here for reasons I'll get into later, but I'm just going to guess the name of these creatures littering the stage. Stupid f***ing robot, stupid f***ing teeth, stupid f***ing race car, and ball. And let's not forget everybody's favorite biplanes are also back. I'm too pissed off to alliterate this time, they suck even worse here. So this level is kind of the ultimate test to the maze layout of the level design. This level is goddamn huge, and it's impossible to find ways up. You start at the bottom left and the cage Spot is at the top right, and you have to navigate through this insanely archaic maze of enemies and disconnected platforms in order to get there. One of the main problems is that falling down means you'll lose a shit ton of progress, and with how big everything is in this level and how damn near everything looks the same, it can be hard to remember just how to get back up once you've fallen. And falling is a huge setback because of how benign these enemies are. The robots move left and right and shoot little projectiles, the teeth chatter along wherever they are aimlessly, the race cars only drive on the bottom floor and kind of just drive in circles, and the balls just roll back and forth. And of course, there's the biplanes, which need no introduction. Based off of these brief descriptions, they don't sound that bad, but that's not factoring in where the game puts these things. Remember those fake walls from peer pressure? They are in full swing here. They'll hide enemies behind giant shoes, giant spelling blocks, giant cards, and pretty much everywhere the game can stick them. It feels so cheap to be moving along, thinking there's nothing to get randomly jumped by teeth. And those screen crunch problems are not getting any better here. Since this level is somewhat designed like a vertical labyrinth and falling down is bound to happen, 9 times out of 10, I'll fall straight down onto an enemy and... okay, probably nothing, but I really wanted to burn this game for a bit, but I couldn't financially justify that, so I'll just sit here and be upset then. This level is genuinely just garbage. I have no defending this one. They did this shit on purpose in some vain attempt at making this game harder. Like, I guess they technically did make it harder, but it doesn't feel fair. Like, yeah, I guess a 5K sprint would be harder if I got shot in the leg, but it's not a fair race. The most egregious part of this fake wall thing for me personally is the fact they hide not just enemies back there, but collectibles. Now, putting a 1-up or a 7-up that gives health back behind these, I have no issue with. These are completely optional items that aren't tallied anywhere. Perfect for a stupid wall to cover up. But sometimes they'll put 7-up logos or red spots here, and that's just about where I draw the line. These are vital collectibles that are needed in order to complete a stage. Now, this isn't a big deal for casual players, but let me introduce something else about Cool Spot real quick. There's a difficulty selection in the options menu, which changes variables in the game. On easy mode, you'll need 40 coolness in order to progress. On hard mode, enemies don't have the chance of dropping a 7-up and you need 90. The usual suspects of an easier or harder mode from a game of its time. And the 90 coolness per level, if you've already played the game, is not hard to achieve. Unless most of the collectibles you need are hidden. 40 coolness on a level is about what it says on the tin. Easy. 60 is pretty doable. 90 is just a bitch! And before I keep whining, the only other thing this difficulty slider changes are required amounts of coolness in order to get a special stage. I don't feel bad completely glossing over the difficulty like this in a non sequitur because of how basic and barely notable it is. And by the way, with how unfair this level is, hard mode feels damn near impossible because of the limited health. Just a complete dog water level, it's actually so ass. But moving away from an actual level into a completely stupid one, we have level 6, Radical Rails.
So remember earlier how I mentioned the different levels? Most of them are designed like giant mazes you need to go through while collecting collectibles along the way. Peer pressure, off the wall, toying around, all of them follow that formula. Then you have the more linear ones of shell shock and waiting around, but this next one is entirely its own. That also might just be because it's dumb.
This entire level, it's just one huge area comprised of only bubbles and 45-degree angle slopes. That's literally it. I mean, it's fun, I guess. There's a bit of a challenge trying to get all the way down to the bottom in order to get a bunch of red spots, but that's literally the definition of filler. And on that note, I think we need to discuss the plot again. I'm going somewhere with this, just listen. So, in canon, according to the Super Nintendo version of the manual for this game, Spot, on his quest to save all of the other spots, travels from the beach to a boat dock, then inside the wall of a toy store, then properly inside the toy store, then whatever the Radical Rails is supposed to be. And then we go back to toying around. Canonically, now that he's freed all of his friends that are inside, he's heading back the way he came to the beach. So yes, we now get remixed versions of the first 3 levels and toying around, which is now known as Wound Up. For the most part, this is the same goddamn level again. This time even more annoying. There are these pencils scattered throughout that have these little spinning dudes at the top of them that are invulnerable when spinning. That's the only change, by the way, except for the background. It's just as miserable as it was the first time. So at this point, you might be thinking that Cool Spot isn't actually as good as I've been hyping it up to be. And I would like to put those fears to rest, because this is the worst the game gets. These 4 levels right here in the middle are the biggest low points, luckily. Wait a minute, 4? Locomotive made me lose my goddamn mind! This level takes place on a train and is what happens when you mix the blinding jumps of waiting around with the enemy spam of toying around. And it also throws in a completely new mechanic of vertigo. This background, man. Talk about a multi-layered problem. I've dimmed the screen considerably for this portion of the video, but the speeds at which this background moves feels nauseating. Not only because of how many colors there are, but there's really no distinction between the background and foreground when everything's moving this fast. It can be incredibly hard to miss jumps or just not see where you're supposed to go because of all of the movement. It's like one of the playtesters when they were making this game didn't think the game was hard enough, so they walked up to one of the other ones and went, "Hey, could you just throttle the CRT when I'm playing? Thanks." Luckily, there isn't any instant death below you, but that doesn't mean dying can't happen. New enemies are Stupid Prospector number 1, Stupid Prospector number 2, and Bird. I've really got no strong feelings on the people who shoot you or throw coal. They're basically just reskin versions of the mice from Off the Wall. But the birds are basically the biplanes again, except for they throw projectiles directly at you. This would be annoying, but luckily they get replaced pretty fast by the regular biplanes, so you wouldn't get scared that they weren't here. These 4 levels here make up the worst of the game. And I'm only placing Radical Rails there in the middle just because it was circumstantially placed between the 3 worst levels in the game. But thankfully, this midpoint is the only part of the game I dislike. Yeah, I actually don't mind the backtracking through previous level themes. Honestly, I think they should have just done this game in the style that the Genesis Sonic games had, where you just go through an Act 1, then an Act 2 versions of levels. These aren't entirely retreads either, because they do add enough to make them stand out from the originals. Off the Wall ditches the flashlight effect and has these new little electricity things that bounce along the ground. Dock and Roll takes place at sunset and has a lot larger gaps. And finally, Surf Patrol forces you to eventually take the upper route early in the stage, effectively making the bottom path a death pit of enemies. But also has a giant volleyball net as flavor in the background. They're different enough to where I honestly don't mind playing through these again. Then the game ends. Yeah, it just kind of stops out of nowhere. Now, I searched and I couldn't find any concrete reason for why the game just ends with the first level again, instead of having some kind of big concrete final stage. But if I had to assume, it was probably deadlines. I mean, to reiterate, this was an advert game, so I couldn't imagine they had heaps of time to make it. But from interviews I could find from the developers who made Cool Spot, it seems like they were trying to polish it as much as possible. And if that's the case, I really don't understand what happened with the end here. And the ending you get for normal mode is...
yes, cool spot. I will go myself.
As this was an advert game, a game with the prime directive to sell you something, 7up decided to have a contest with the game. If you could beat the game on hard mode while getting all of the letters to spell Uncola and never needing to continue, you could take a photo of your TV and mail it to them in order to get a prize. Which explains a lot, actually. I mean, if 7up themselves had giving away free product on the line, no wonder they would make it hard as balls. Which honestly kind of stinks because obviously this contest isn't open anymore, so it's just kind of hard nowadays, unjustly, without any prize to speak of. Hey, hang on, what was this prize? I don't know. According to VG Facts, according to TV Tropes, all that was given away was a small plastic toy which is entirely unconfirmed and nobody really knows what was given out. I was able to find some small spot toys floating around eBay, but those in all likelihood could have just been a toy sold in any other context. Which leaves us here, a game that feels partially bastardized because of 7up contest that we don't even get the payoff for. Cool. So that is the Super Nintendo version of Cool Spot. I'm not ready for the final conclusion just for this one. I still haven't talked about everything I wanted to, but I like it a lot. Those 3 levels snuck in there really bogged down the experience a bit, but overall it's a blast. Not only has it held up shockingly well, but it's disturbingly good for an advert game. It really shows what can happen when a small developer is dedicated to working with what they have.
They could have just as easily spat out a cash grab game like Pepsi Man or that one Cheetos one I already forgot the name of. But no, they went above and beyond here to make something that was truly quality. Even if it seems like they had to compromise their vision just a hair. I love how Spot controls. The game still looks good today. I love his pseudo Rayman-esque platforming. It all feels great. It has held up immaculately. Overall, it's a really good game, even if it does have a few hairs in the soda. But that is speaking of the Super Nintendo version of the game. Just like the Spot video game before it has several versions across different consoles. Unlike Spot the video game, these actually hold interesting differences for us to talk about. Whenever anybody plays Cool Spot nowadays, they usually play one of 2 versions depending on preference. The Super Nintendo version and the Sega Genesis version. So as soon as I was done with the SNES one, I fired up the Genesis one, eager to see what was between the 2 consoles. And surprisingly, a lot was different. I mean, you would obviously expect huge changes to something like the Game Boy or Game Gear versions, but those are 2 completely different experiences. Let's start with the obvious comparisons. For starters, the graphics are a lot different. Pretty much everything except for a lot of the moving sprites like Spot or the enemies have been changed in one way or another. If these are good or bad changes is really up to preference, but I think it's more neutral with the Super Nintendo one visually. What is definitively better though is the music. Anybody who knows anything about anything knows that one of the big things the Genesis had over the Super Nintendo was higher music quality. It's not just that people were making better music for it, it's just that it could handle better music. And yeah, that definitely goes for Cool Spot as well. Just listen to both versions of Wipeout back to back and tell me which one you think sounds better. Like, come on. The Nintendo one sounds fine, but I feel like the Genesis one feels like it's hitting me in the face with those drums. Pretty much all of the music in the Genesis version follows along with this. All of the music and sounds of this version just feel better, you know? And also while we're here, I guess we should talk about the music as a whole, since that's one of the last things we have left to discuss, and it's just fine. Nothing bad, nothing too memorable. It is all perfectly adequate. Do you see why I waited till now to talk about that? I mean, just from those 2 points alone, you might be convinced to think that the Genesis one is better than the Super Nintendo version, right? But what if I told you that every review outlet covering this game is a lying cow? Because, oh my god, I could not stand the Genesis version. So those first 2 differences were just visual and audio stuff. The rest of them are gameplay differences, and they completely butcher the hell out of this game. For starters, he can no longer lock in place and shoot freely, which completely destroys how he controls. Do you want to shoot diagonally at an enemy below you? You can't do that now. Do you want to lock in place and shoot at an airborne enemy but don't want to risk running into hazards? You can't do that now. The worst case of this is every level that has ropes in it. You can't lock in place on those either, so levels where you need to shoot at anything below or above you on a rope is damn near impossible now. During Off the Wall, there are several points where you need to shoot up and down diagonally at mice. In the SNES version, this is no problem, but in the Genesis version, you have to play this weird up and down game where you're basically just
edging the mice to death now. That's not even the end of my problems with the rope changes, because they changed how far you can jump from them for no reason. Remember the different jumps I discussed earlier? The somersault and then the basic straight up one? Well, now you can only do the basic one off ropes, making loads of jumps far closer because of how handicapped rope climbing is now. They've also made the game accidentally harder, I feel. 7-ups no longer give a majority of your health back and now give you 2 extra hit points, making every level just feel a whole lot more challenging for like no reason. And that's just combat. Platforming also feels needlessly more difficult. The camera immediately starts moving depending on which D-pad direction you're holding, so when you're trying to move around, the camera starts flying all over the place like the Knuckles Chaotix ring. For no f***ing reason, they also made the background and locomotive faster! And the UFO platforms also fall out from under you near instantly, so that level is damn near unplayable. Slopes now send you skyrocketing downwards without a chance to react. The UI has almost no style now, and the font looks worse.
Genuinely don't understand how people prefer the Genesis version. The music and sounds are leagues better, don't get me wrong, but if that's the only advantage, I think I'm just gonna stick with the Super Nintendo one.
If I had to give some kind of defense to the Genesis version, it would be that it was the first one out of all of them, meaning that's the roughest one around the edges because they didn't have the time to refine it. So I can kinda understand a lot of this version's issues knowing that it was technically the first one. But you see, the reason I'm ignoring that is because I forgot to check when each version of Cool Spot actually came out while writing, and I've only realized this now while editing, so throw tomatoes at me in the comments, please. I vastly prefer the Super Nintendo version. I'm sorry. Call me a fake fan and I'll call you somebody who's never played every version of Cool Spot. Now, those are the 2 main versions everybody knows, but we can go farther with this. Here's Cool Spot on the DOS and Amiga. Just like last time, I have no idea what an Amiga is, so I'll be looking at the DOS one since they're pretty much the same experience. And yeah, by and large, this is pretty much the Genesis version again. They did change some stuff though, adding a bunch of gradients here and there. Ooh. Honestly, a fine way to play the game on computers if nothing else. But we can go farther. Here's Cool Spot on the Game Gear. And you know what? For a mobile port of a home console game, this is actually pretty damn solid. It still has that same style as the originals, but since this is a handheld variant of the game, they had to cut some stuff. And by some stuff, I mean 3 of the levels. Do you want to guess which ones those were? Funny how removing content somehow makes this the best version. Yeah, locomotive, toying around, and wound up are just missing. It makes the game like an hour long, but damn it, that's an enjoyable hour. There is something to be said about the screen crunch though. Yes, this obviously makes the game harder because of how limited your field of view is, but somehow makes all of the special stages easy as shit though. Because of how small the screen is, every time a bubble is off screen, it returns to its base form. So you don't need to wait for it to re-manifest when you jump off of one, meaning these things will basically never go away and there's never a chance you'll fall. It's hilarious. Something else I found funny was that the UI was rendered on the same plane as Spot and the enemies, meaning that the fake walls just eclipse everything else. Honestly, a pretty solid version of the game. Nowhere close to the SNES one, but hey, as a portable version, you could do a lot worse. Also, for the people actually looking at the screen, you might have noticed on my little spin dial here that I'm currently displaying the wrong Game Boy game. Currently on screen is not Cool Spot for Game Boy, but instead Spot the Cool Adventure, which is a game we have yet to talk about.
Okay, funny thing, when I decided I was going to dedicate to this style of video making where I'd have everything presented on a little spin dial, that also meant I had to buy every game I was talking about and every version of every game I was talking about. So when I was getting every Spot game and every version of every Spot game, I accidentally bought Spot the Cool Adventure twice. They're both upside down. So the Game Boy variant of Cool Spot seems to be a port of the Game Gear variant of Cool Spot, which itself is a port of the Genesis version. Jesus Christ, they're inbreeding. It's like, okay, I guess. I mean, as a way to play Cool Spot on a Game Gear on a Game Boy, I will concede it should be far shittier than this. Since it's the Game Gear version again, it shares all of its little quirks, like the levels being missing. Still though, somehow this isn't the worst version of Cool Spot. I have the honor of giving that trophy to Cool Spot on the Master System, which shipping got here too late for me to show. Have you seen this game run on a Master System? That depends. Ever seen a goat f***ing die?
This is disgusting on levels only seen in dementia patients. So, like, what do you want me to say about this? Looking at my footage should make it blatantly obvious the quality of the Master System port. This is nasty.
Okay, that is every version of Cool Spot I was able to play. I know I kind of glossed over the Amiga version, but let me ask you this. What the f*** is an Amiga? Also, it's like the same as the DOS one, who cares? And I am disturbed to find out how many of them were actually good. Like, even the ones you would think would be reasonably dog shit are still pretty alright. And like, I had my gripes with the Genesis one, but if it's the only version you've played or have available, it's fine. I don't really think there's a point to ranking all of them, but just know the Super Nintendo version is my personal favorite. of the ones you can play in North America.
Okay, I'll be fast because I've talked about this game for like 40 fucking minutes up to this point. But remember how I was talking about how Virgin did a lot of European versions of different games? That wasn't just a random non sequitur to make them sound more impressive than they actually were. It was. But when I was looking through the console variants of this game, I also found this. The European version of Cool Spot. You see, in America, we had Spot as our 7-Up mascot, but in Europe, they had this Fido Dido guy instead. So when they brought the game over to Europe, they replaced all of the 7-Up branding with their own. The bottle in the intro has been replaced with a message in a bottle instead. All of the 7-Up logos now say Virgin, including the Uncola screen.
That was not interesting at all. I just thought it was neat and worth bringing up.
I honestly love this game. Its attempts at appealing to the radical dude bro audience are so try-hard that it wraps around to being sick as hell again. It's like Sonic but completely missing the point. I love it. I have to say, out of all of the Adver games I have played, 2 now, this is the best one. It just feels so charming and honest. These developers just worked with what they had and really made something special. And if that isn't worth applause, then I don't know what is.
We still have 2 games left.
Cool Spot, due to positive reviews, actually sold quite well. The only number I can find is on the Wikipedia where it just says 1 million. Like exactly? So it's safe to say the world was in spot fever, at least 1 million of them. Enough to warrant a sequel releasing 1 year prior on the Game Boy. Why didn't I talk about Spot the Cool Adventure before Cool Spot if it came out in 1992 when Cool Spot came out in 1993? Well, I just learned it came out beforehand, okay? Shut up, you stupid bitch, you didn't know either. But before we talk about it, we need to talk about its history. Yes, I'm serious, just give me a minute. MC Kids is a McDonald's game on the NES. It's actually pretty fun. I'm not going into more detail because I don't care, but the important thing is that it was made by Virgin Games, and they wanted to bring MC Children over to their Game Boy. So why not spackle some Spot over all of their MC slop? And as you might be able to predict by looking at this footage, this is legitimately one of the worst video games I have ever played. I'm going to keep this one short because there's only so much I can say here. For starters, this barely even looks like a Cool Spot game. The only thing Spot about him is him being hair and the red spots being littered everywhere. He looks like a vacuum cleaner. His jumps are pathetic. You can't shoot enemies. Instead, you have to pick up blocks. This is actual shovelware. And it disgusts me because a game like this is everything Cool Spot drove not to be. The port of Cool Spot on the Game Boy is leagues better than this, and they're on the same console. Cool Spot feels so ingenuitive. It's at a level of quality hardly any other Adver game ever reached. It's a damn shame to see it go to the depths of being a reskin of a McDonald's game. Look, I partially respect your time as a viewer. I say partially because you're nearly an hour into a Cool Spot video essay. But the point is, I don't want to waste your time, and thusly, I will not be wasting your time by talking about Spot the Cool Adventure for Game Boy. It is a complete waste of space, and not even the best Spot game on its console. Spot the video game and Cool Spot on the Game Boy are both leagues better. We're gonna move right along to Cool Spot's actual next game now, if you wouldn't mind.
Wait a minute, I own 2 of these. I can justify burning one.
So I couldn't find any interesting anecdote about the next game's background unlike the last couple. All I could find was, Cool Spot sold well, they wanted to make another because they thought it would sell well. That's all, folks! Which sucks, because I love artificially inflating my videos with filler nobody cares about. Do you want proof? What was the name of Spot the video game's original name before 7-Up spackled their name on it? Don't comment, don't even pause the video to think. I know you don't know it!
Let us talk about the next Spot game now.
It was Inflection! Spot goes to Hollywood! Unlike with Cool Spot, where we started by playing the best one first and then went through all the other versions, we'll be starting with the original one and then talking about all of its ports. So for this one, we'll be starting out with the Genesis version of the game, and then we'll talk about the Sega Saturn and PS1 versions. So the idea this time is that Spot is starring in his own movie called Spot Goes to Hollywood, that narcissistic prick. And all of the levels are based off of random fantasy locations like pirate ship, and water, and a haunted house, and temple. And they gave up after that. This game feels so identically confused with what it wants to be. Like, the first half of it being generic fantasy is fine as long as they do something unique with it, and in my opinion, they kind of live up to that. For the first 3 themes, it does what I wish Cool Spot did and splits them up into 3 different acts. For the pirate ship, you'll be above deck, then below deck, and then in the water. That's cool. It's a cool way of splitting up everything and tying it into one theme without making it feel like you're retreading the same territory. They typically share enemies between levels, but layouts and even sprites change pretty drastically in some cases. The first first temple level looks pretty generic and is a big open area, until you go inside in the second level, which it turns into more narrow hallways with lava hazards. The first ghost house level takes place at the top floor of the manor, while the last one takes place in the basement, utilizing keys to open different doors in more of a puzzle format. I like what it attempts, and it's commendable all of the different levels and looks they can build around one centralizing theme. Then for the final world, they just say f it and abandon all of that and just do shitty pop culture references. Hey look, it's Star Wars. Hey look, it's Alien. Hey look, it's Terminator. Hey look, it's Tron on the worst controlling motorcycle in a video game. I feel like we need to address the elephant in the room. I said earlier that Spot was like Sonic, but completely missing the point. And to make another Sonic comparison, this is the Sonic 3D Blast of the franchise, in the way that it's in an isometric view. This is a bad idea. But I actually don't hate it here. Okay, for one, these controls are rough. They aren't horrible, but they definitely take some time getting used to. You see, we're looking at everything in this game from an angle. That's because this is really the farthest a Genesis game could go in terms of 3D. And the problem with that is how a character on a board like this should even move. You're using a controller that's only form of movement is a D-pad, of which points north, west, east, and south. But we're looking at a field that will logistically make those directions instead northwest, southwest, northeast, and southeast. Looking at it, you would probably say moving upwards would take you in this direction. But that's not the same as playing it. My brain sees I need to go up and doesn't hold up, instead holds up and to the right, because that's the direction it looks like I should be moving in. Sonic 3D Blast did the logical thing, instead f*** it by making Sonic move how the D-pad is oriented. Up moves him up from our perspective, down from our perspective, you get it. But Spot plays like if you were looking at this from the back and playing like things aren't skewed like this. So this game has an insane learning curve where you have to rewrite your entire brain in order to adjust to its whack-ass play scheme. Honestly, I don't blame anybody who fell off this game based off of this alone. Could you imagine playing this game as a kid and holding up just to be taken up and to the right? Like, as I'm saying it out loud, it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but it is an egregious way of playing a game. Honestly, I wish they just did what Sonic 3D Blast did. Last time I'm saying that! And made it to where holding up takes you up. At least all of the levels are built around this archaic control scheme, but I really wish they weren't. It would have been far more approachable if they just gave it a sensible control scheme and redesigned the levels to accommodate for it. Regardless though, when you do have a hang of everything, it's actually pretty good. It is a humongous ask for somebody to adjust to this, but if you can make it through all of that, you'll be met with a pretty okay to whatever platformer. For an isometric Sega Genesis game though, it is definitely up there as one of the best. The platforming works, I can usually pretty clearly see where I'm going to land. It's not perfect by any means, and it doesn't even come close to Cool Spot in terms of platforming, but it's not bad, all things considered. The cool shot is back, predictably, functioning as it always has, and he also has a run button now. I'm honestly not as upset as you might be thinking I am. They've already changed everything else. I think the momentum mechanic will completely screw all of the other things over. Running's here for just when you want to blaze through things, and then just regular walking for when you want to be methodical in a game called Spot Goes to Hollywood. One thing I am particularly pissed about them excluding though is the lock in place button again. Because I can't win, it has been removed from his arsenal, which makes combat a bitch 90% of the time. Orchestrated no better by these crab dudes in the pirate ship level. It'll throw projectiles directly at your location, and trying to run around while firing at this thing feels impossible. If I were able to, say, lock in place and shoot diagonally at it while running around, I feel like it would be a lot more manageable. Enemies in this game come at you from pretty much every angle, so not including this feels so wrong. I feel like this game needs it more than Cool Spot itself a lot of the time. They could have alternatively just not designed the enemies to be bastards. Everything that you need to fight in this game feels so cheap and unfair. Most enemies that throw projectiles throw them dead at you, and if you're trying to attack them back, there's no way you're avoiding taking damage. Or other ones that are melee focused move so fast that paired with the other obstacles in the stage, it becomes a Herculean feat to just not use save states. I use save states, I'm not sorry. If it makes you feel any better, I did the same for the Genesis version of Cool Spot and nobody cared back then. So, the structure of these levels just kind of follows suit with Cool Spot. You need to get enough coolness in order to move on. But instead of spots being trapped in cages, it's a Hollywood star you need to reach. And that star is only activated when you have 60 coolness. And the requirements for 60 coolness change level by level for some reason. It varies between 10 to 30 red spots per level. When it's 10, they give you 10% coolness with every spot collected. When it's 20, 20, it's 5%, when it's 30, it's 3%, which is the most needless feeling thing ever. Nothing was wrong with the 100 red spot system in the last game. What was the point of this? So much of this game is just questions for me. Why did they choose an isometric angle instead of doing a proper follow-up to Cool Spot? Why can't I lock in place? Why aren't I having fun? Most of our talk about Spot Goes to Hollywood has been about the first 3 worlds so far. The final one can kiss my ass. Oh my god. The first one is a Terminator themed level, and I actually kind of liked it. It had this cool mechanic of a Spot Terminator that would chase you around the entire stage as you frantically scramble to get all the red spots. This is a cool attempt at having a roaming threat in a platformer like this. The second level is literally just the turbo tunnel for Battletoads. This is a parody of the Meridian Trench Run from Star Wars if you have eyes, and is so unplayable. This game has few vehicle stages, and all of them are stupidly difficult. You see, because of the angle the game puts itself at, that means the stuff coming at you, from this game's perspective, forward, is really hard to see coming. Now, this isn't a problem in regular gameplay, but when you're going 90 miles per hour in a minecart and you need to react to stuff happening immediately, it kind of becomes a bit of an issue. This minecart level just sucks, man. It feels damn near impossible with how fast they want you to turn in order to get off these broken tracks in time. I mean, at least there are periods in it where you slow down, so there's a bit of control there. But now imagine the minecart level without any of the grace periods afforded. The Death Star level is so f***ing hard for no reason. By the way, this is a good point to bring up that this game uses passwords as its save system, so every time you game over, which is probably going to happen quite a few times, you have to put in this big ass password in order to try again. Sorry I don't have footage of that, I use save states like a normal person. Genuinely, this level took me half an hour. Then they have the alien theme where the xenomorphs just full tilt sprint directly at you, which would be bad enough if there weren't the facehuggers to latch onto you like a tumor and deal constant damage. This wouldn't be a problem if I could just pick them off from afar, but I can't because of how small and scary they are and how these shitty little shooting controls are. And then finally there's the Tron level, which is another vehicle stage.
I want to remind everybody that I like Cool Spot.
This level can go f*** itself, I'm so tired. This motorcycle has pissing tank controls, so if you're going straight you can't turn on a dime, you have to turn left or right, then go backwards. It makes a motorcycle feel sticky. How do you make a motorcycle feel sticky? And then right after you finish the stage it tells you you're wrapped up filming. Nah, audio listeners, that's not me making a stupid joke. That's literally what it says on screen.
I'm sorry, I just gotta break the mood for a second. That line is so funny to me. Like, could you imagine a real director saying that to an actor?
You have a final boss, which also segues me into talking about all of the bosses. All of them are horrible. I had a whole segment here about the bosses, but you can probably get the gist of how they are based off the quality of everything else here. So I'll stop wasting your time and move right along. Okay, breaking mood for a second. The face on this thing had me dying. Look at what they did to the Queen Xenomorph. They gave it this dumbass smile and sunglasses. It's hilarious. It also barely attacks you and dies within a minute. I feel like that's also worth mentioning. Also, the level directly leading to this thing is completely unfair.
Then the game ends. I don't think I liked it too much.
It is a damn shame I have to say that too, because there's so much baked in here I wish I could love. Its controls are surprisingly good for an isometric game like this. I don't hate the concept even if it completely abandons the idea of him being small. It had so much potential and it sucks that I truly did not like it. It is far too difficult for its own good. I would say it's even harder than the toy levels of Cool Spot. These boss battles just reek. Most of the enemies are horribly unbalanced. A lot of the levels are just unfair. The pop culture references aren't funny, the music isn't even that good, and I lied, it's called Infection! I wish I could love this game as much as I did Cool Spot, but I just can't. It gets too much wrong. Isometric games like this, I feel like just don't work on these older consoles. It wasn't just flawed in the execution, but it was a fundamentally bad idea.
Well, that's the end of Spot. I did say there are 4 games, and for those mathematicians out there, you've probably counted we've talked about 4 games now. So, what else is there really to say?
Wait, we didn't talk about the other console versions. I couldn't get any emulator running these, so I'm playing the PS1 version on official hardware. And I can't imagine this will be anything that'll change my mind. It's probably just a bare bones port of the original. I lied. I tricked you. We've been talking about the worst version of the game. Spot Goes to Hollywood for the Sega Saturn and PS1 is a completely different game. They do share similar themes and basic ideas of Spot going to guess where, but everything else here is drastically different. For starters, these levels aren't horrible now. They are still from an isometric view, and it's definitely hard to gauge where you're jumping and moving a lot of the time, but for the most part, excluding 1 or 2 levels, they account for that. It felt like Spot Goes to Hollywood for Genesis was trying to do a 3D take on Cool Spot's vertical levels, without really factoring in how any of that would work with an isometric POV. But now it's more laid out like Crash Bandicoot-style hallways, returning to the more combat-oriented gameplay of Cool Spot. These levels are usually flat plains with light platforming here and there, with the real challenge being navigating around the enemies. There's still no lock-in-place feature, which is surely needed, but I didn't feel myself clamoring for it hardly as much. Another thing that's leaps and bounds better are the vehicle stages. These are still challenging, no doubt, but it feels fair at least, especially considering they actually put checkpoints in them this time. The first one, where Spot rides a cannon on the pirate ship, was genuinely a lot of fun. They slowed these way down, which was definitely for the better. It gives you time to react now, which should be the baseline, shouldn't it? Like, yes, the minecart level is still instant kill, but not only is it balanced better, it's also shorter, has checkpoints, and if you game over, you only have to restart from the beginning, which isn't that far from the end of it. I would still say I spent the same amount of time, and might even have had the same amount of deaths, but every death felt like my fault, which is something I could never say about the Genesis version. Something else I could never say is that I don't mind the bosses. They are all pretty whatever, but I don't hate them, and that's honestly a huge achievement. Something else I would say is a huge achievement are these visuals, because holy shit, this game looks fucking beautiful. All of these animations are so expressive and alive looking. These feel like Disney quality animations with some of them. This animation is not only better than Spot Goes to Hollywood for Genesis, but also Cool Spot itself. This game is gorgeous, I love it! What is also somehow really damn good for a game called Smudge Goes to California is the music. I don't know what they did or who they paid, but this feels movie quality. The soundtrack isn't licensed from anywhere or taken from somewhere else at all, it was just made like this. It's all orchestral, making it feel like you're actually going through a movie. None of it will knock your socks off, but it's disturbingly high quality for an advert game. People say all the time, oh, they didn't need to go this hard with the music. When they did, it's their job. But I mean it when I say they did not need to go that hard with the music, considering the music is for a subpar platformer where you control a circle. I don't hate playing Spot Goes to Hollywood on PS1. Doesn't mean I love it either. Yeah, the game still isn't perfect. I just don't think the isometric angle for the camera was a good idea to begin with. They executed it about as well as they possibly could have, but that's not where the flaws lie. Spot Goes to Hollywood, no matter which platform we're looking at, is a fundamentally flawed game. The PS1 and Sega Saturn versions, bless their hearts, but there's only so much polish you can give to an object that would not become better if polished. I love this game's style, from its animation to its music to its really enjoyable cutscenes I forgot to bring up when I'm trying to mention now to vindicate the mistake of not mentioning it, but I just cannot get behind its gameplay. They really did their best to salvage this game with the PS1 and Sega Saturn versions, but unfortunately, there's only so much you can do to fix up a game like this. These two are definitely the best versions of Spot Goes to Hollywood, and I certainly don't dislike the game, but I just can't bring myself to love it as much as I do the original. And with that, we have now talked about every Cool Spot game. And you might have asked yourself a real question by now. What was the point of all of this? There was an original point which I'll circle back around to, but as I was making this video, it took on many forms. It first started out as a writing challenge to see if I could make one of my typical feature-length videos about a series as ridiculous as this one. It then turned into one of my autistic hyperfixation videos where I get obsessed with a topic to the point of exhaustion, and it's now turned into this. It's no longer about some secret thing I'm hiding till later, or a writing challenge, or autism. This is a video about art. Especially today, loads of artists have to compromise their own work in order to make a sustainable amount of money. Journalism and video creation doesn't exactly pay the bills, so it's often that people like me will take a sponsor or advertise something stupid in the middle of their own video just so they can make enough money to feed themselves. In a lot of cases, people are forced to do or say things they don't exactly believe in order to stay afloat. Sometimes, people are forced to create something they might not want to create in order to keep the lights on. And in this specific case, one development team had to make a game in order to pay the bills. It's a sad truth, but that's just the way the entertainment industry has shaped out. But few developers have chosen to thrive in spite of it. Few developers decided to make something truly special out of what they were given.
and Virgin is one of them. I couldn't find out if this is something Virgin originally wanted to make, but it's definitely something they were proud of, and they should be. Cool Spot is a truly rare game, and it only has the quality it does because of the few rare people making it. Sometimes you're forced to do stuff you don't want to when it comes to creating art, but Virgin shows that you can strive in spite of that and create something truly unique. If it isn't obvious, I love Spot, and hopefully through this video, I'm not the only one now. You know, if it wasn't for Virgin doing their damn best, I probably wouldn't even care or know about this guy. And I think there's an important lesson that can be gleaned from this. Sometimes you're gonna have to create something you don't want to create just so you can get by. But if you're gonna have to create it, you might as well make it your damn best.
Okay, time for the actual reason this video was created. So, as a part of the writing challenge I was discussing earlier, I wanted to give myself a win and lose condition. If I was able to make a 2-hour-long video about Spot, then I would win. But if I lost, I would be letting one of you choose a future feature-length video of mine. So how exactly am I executing this? Well, this is how.
Gazpacho One's Topic Taker Tournament!
Alright, here's how we're doing this thing. You fine folks are going to give your submissions for a new video of mine. I'll be pulling topics from the comments of this video with the community post announcing this tournament, the video suggestions channel of my Discord server, and if you would like to be anonymous, you can use the straw page link in the description and pinned comment. I am taking any and all suggestions, regardless of how stupid or contrived. Review every Garden of Bandman game? Counts. Ranking everything that IKEA sells on their website? Of course. It's all valid regardless of topic. I'll be pulling submissions on the 30th of February, and they shall all compete in community polls to see which shall take the Topic Tournament trophy. Okay, yeah, Cool Spot, bye.